I'm Jason, and I'm 29 now, living in Columbus, Ohio. But the story I'm about to tell you happened back in 2017, when I was 21 and still in college. I was going to Ohio State at the time, studying sports management, with this dream of working for an NFL team one day. Looking back now, I don't think any of that mattered much, because the thing that happened in the woods that fall still sticks in my head more than any of the stuff I studied. To give some background, I grew up in Chillicothe, a smaller city about an hour south of Columbus. My friends and I were always outdoors. We camped, fished, and did dumb stuff in the woods. One of my buddies, Travis, told us his uncle had a cabin about 25 minutes outside of Athens, Ohio. This was right around early October, football season. The leaves were changing, and we all wanted to get out of the city for a bit. There were 5 of us who ended up going. Me, Travis, his girlfriend at the time, Mandy, our friend Drew, and this other guy named Corey, who I only really knew from parties but got along with fine. Drive down Friday evening, hang out in the cabin all weekend, drink, cook out, play cards, maybe hit a trail or two. Just a regular college kid trip. The cabin wasn't exactly luxury. It was one of those single-level, 2-bedroom spots with old wood siding, a fire pit out front, and a little gravel driveway. No Wi-Fi. Barely any phone reception unless you walked up the hill behind it, but that was part of the fun. Friday night went smooth. We got there around 6:30 p.m., grilled burgers on a little rusty charcoal grill, sat by the fire, and played some drinking games. It was cold enough to see your breath, and the sky was so clear you could see every star. That's something you never get in Columbus. The weird stuff didn't happen until Saturday night. We had spent most of the day hiking this trail near Stroud's Run State Park. Came back late afternoon, tired but in a good mood. I remember we stopped at a Kroger on the way back into Athens to grab extra beer, some chips, and Mandy picked up marshmallows because she wanted s'mores. The cashier was this older woman who warned us to be careful out there because bow hunting season had just started. I thought she was just making conversation, but I remember it now because it stuck in my head later. By 8 p.m. that night, we had the fire going again. Travis was telling dumb jokes. Corey was trying to teach Drew how to play some card game none of us knew, and Mandy was poking at the fire like she was obsessed with making the perfect ember. The woods around us were pitch black. If you've ever been that deep in the country, you know what I mean. No light pollution, just complete darkness past the firelight. At one point, I walked behind the cabin to pee and thought I saw a light moving through the trees, like a flashlight beam. It was faint, like 100 yards away. I brushed it off. Around 9:45, both Drew and Corey got up from the fire. Drew had to take a call from his girlfriend, and Corey just said he had to take a leak. They walked off together toward the edge of the woods, past where the cars were parked. It wasn't weird, people were always walking off to make calls, since that was the only spot you'd sometimes get service. The rest of us stayed by the fire. We roasted marshmallows and were laughing about something dumb. After like 10 minutes, we heard yelling. Travis was the first to jump up. "That's them," he said, and bolted toward the cars. Mandy and I followed. I thought Corey got stung by a wasp or tripped on something, and we got closer. We realized it wasn't that at all. Drew came stumbling out of the tree line first. He had blood all over the side of his shirt, clutching at his arm. He was shouting, "He's still out there! He's still out there!" Behind him, Corey was limping, dragging his left leg, with blood running down from what looked like a cut on his thigh. He kept screaming, "It was a guy! It was a guy!" over and over, like he couldn't believe it himself. Travis helped Drew, and I grabbed Corey by the shoulder, half carrying him toward the firelight. When I got a closer look, I saw it wasn't just scratches. They looked like knife wounds. Clean cuts. Both of them were hysterical. Drew kept saying somebody came out of the woods fast, like they were hiding there waiting. Said the guy had some kind of mask on, like a ski mask or maybe just a hood pulled tight, but he definitely knew it was a person. Corey swore he saw a blade flash in the light of Drew's phone. We were panicking at that point. Mandy was crying, and Travis was trying to call 911, but the signal was garbage. He ran up the hill behind the cabin to get a bar of service while I tried to stop Corey's bleeding with my hoodie. By the time the sheriff's deputies got there, it felt like hours. They had EMTs take Drew and Corey straight to the hospital in Athens. Both had to get stitches, and Corey needed surgery for muscle damage in his leg. The cops stayed and questioned us until almost 3 a.m. They swept the woods with flashlights, but they didn't find anybody. One deputy came back and said they saw footprints in the mud, but they couldn't tell how many. The next morning, the sheriff himself came by and asked more questions. He told us straight up the wounds looked like knife injuries, not claws or animal bites, which ruled out my first thought, which was maybe a wild animal or even barbed wire. They asked us if we knew anyone in the area, had enemies, anything like that. None of us did. We were just college kids trying to party in the woods. We packed up and left that afternoon. Nobody wanted to stay another night. Here's where the random life stuff ties in. That trip kind of changed things for me. Travis and Mandy broke up a few months later, totally unrelated, but I always think about how she was there that night crying by the fire. Drew transferred schools the next semester, went to Cincinnati, and I didn't see him much after that. Corey had to walk with a cane for almost 6 months while he healed. As for me, I stopped camping for a long time. There's one detail I didn't mention earlier. After the EMTs took Drew and Corey, I was walking back behind the cabin to grab some of their stuff they dropped. I noticed something hanging from one of the trees about 10 feet up. I thought it was trash caught in the branches. When I got closer, I realized it was a rope, tied in a noose, just swaying there. I didn't tell the cops about it because I thought maybe it was old hunting gear or something. But the knot was too clean and it looked new. Sometimes I think whoever attacked my friends wasn't just trying to scare us off. They were waiting out there, watching, and we just happened to be the ones who walked into their woods that night. I went through something a couple of years ago that stuck with us ever since. I've been tempted to write it down before just so I can get it out of my system, but never got around to it. Since then, I've moved on with my life. Jobs have changed, relationships have started and ended, but that weekend, out in the woods, it still sits with me like it just happened. I'm Brian. I was 28, working at an auto body shop in eastern Kentucky. My younger brother, Daniel, was 25. He still lived at home with our parents at the time, doing work, though now he's married and has a kid on the way. We grew up hunting, mostly deer and turkey, sometimes squirrel if we were just killing time. It wasn't really about the meat as much as it was an excuse to get out into the woods together and breathe some fresh air. It was October 2021 when this happened. Reds and oranges everywhere, with that smell of damp earth and campfire smoke carrying through the valleys. If you live in the Appalachian area, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It was one of those weekends where the temperature dropped fast after sundown, down into the high 30s, but in the daytime you could walk around in just a hoodie. Daniel and I planned to spend the whole weekend up on some family-owned property about 45 minutes outside of town. It wasn't a proper cabin, just a little shack my uncle built back in the 80s. It had no running water, but it had a wood stove, a couple of cots, and a squeaky screen door that banged if you didn't catch it on the way in. We used to camp there a lot when we were kids, so going back always felt like stepping into a memory. The first night we got there, we unloaded the rifles, threw a couple of bags of groceries in the shack, and started a fire outside in the rusty old ring made of cinder blocks. Daniel had brought a 6-pack of Yuengling, I had a bottle of Evan Williams, and we just sat out under the stars telling the same old family stories. There's this one about how my dad once fell asleep in a tree stand and dropped his sandwich onto a buck's back. It never gets old to us. Anyway, the first strange thing happened the next morning. We were walking along the ridge that overlooks a creek. It was about 9 a.m. and the light was just breaking through the fog in those long silver beams. Then Daniel stopped walking. He pointed downhill toward the tree line, and I saw this person. A man, like 40 or 50 years old, wearing a faded red long-sleeve shirt. He was standing way too still, like not shifting his weight or anything, just staring up the ridge at us. I said, "You see that?" And Daniel nodded without taking his eyes off the guy. After like 30 seconds, he just turned and walked deeper into the trees. No gun, no bow, no orange vest, which was already weird for that time of year. We figured he was just some hiker or a neighbor wandering onto the property. But here's the thing, there's no trails out there. None. The only people who ever go onto that land are us and maybe the old farmer who lives a couple miles down the road. We brushed it off. I mean, what were we going to do? Chase him down? We just kept hunting, didn't see much, and headed back to the shack around noon for lunch. Daniel fried up some eggs and bacon on the little camp stove while I cleaned my rifle. We talked about the guy for maybe a minute, but then dropped it. That night we played cards by lantern light and drank the rest of the beer. Everything seemed fine. It was the second day when things went wrong. Daniel went out on his own that morning. He liked still hunting along the creek, moving slow and waiting for deer to cross. I went the opposite direction toward the ridge. Around 10, I heard something like wood breaking. Loud, sharp cracks echoing. I thought it was just a branch falling, but I got this weird feeling that it wasn't just nature. Not long after, I heard Daniel yelling my name. I ran back down the slope and found him standing in a clearing, pale and out of breath. His hat was on the ground, and about 10 feet away was this massive tree branch, like thicker than my leg, snapped clean off from somewhere above and lying right where he had been. He told me he'd seen the man again, same red shirt, said the guy came out of nowhere, right behind him, holding that branch over his shoulder like a weapon before hurling it at him. He barely ducked out of the way in time. Now, I'll be honest, my first reaction was to laugh because the idea of someone throwing a branch that size at another grown man sounded like some cartoon fight. But when I saw Daniel's face, I knew he wasn't joking. His hands were trembling. He swore up and down the guy was aiming for his head. We decided to stick together after that. No more splitting up. We walked back toward the shack, rifles in hand, not really talking. About halfway back, we saw him again. This time, it was unmistakable. He stepped right out onto the path about 30 yards ahead of us. Same build, but now he was wearing black gloves and a cheap blue face mask like the kind you saw everywhere during COVID. The red shirt was gone, replaced with a dark jacket, but I knew it was him. The way he stood, feet apart, arms loose at his sides, was exactly the same. He didn't say a word, stared at us through that mask. After like 10 seconds, Daniel said, "What do we do?" Before I could answer, the guy took one step forward. Just one. That was enough. We both bolted. We didn't look back, just ran through the woods, tripping over roots and nearly dropping our rifles. I don't even remember the run clearly. It's like my brain blocked it out. We didn't stop until we were at the shack, slamming the door and jamming a chair under the handle. We sat there for like an hour, listening. Finally, I said screw it and called the county sheriff. Cell service out there is spotty, but I managed to get through. A deputy showed up about 40 minutes later in a dusty Tahoe. He looked around with a flashlight, walked the perimeter, checked the trail, and came back shaking his head. "You boys sure you weren't drinking a little too much?" That pissed Daniel off. He pulled the deputy over to the clearing where the branch had landed and showed him. The thing was huge. You couldn't make that up. The cops never found anyone out there. This happened in 2014, when I was 26 years old, and at the time, I was working odd jobs around my town just to stay afloat. I grew up in a small rural community in western Kentucky, about an hour and a half outside Louisville. We didn't really have much to do except work, fish, drink on weekends, and talk about high school football games like they were Super Bowls. At the time, I was working for a guy named Donnie. He owned this small landscaping and fencing business. Donnie was one of those older guys who smoked 2 packs of Marlboros a day, had a pot belly, but could still outwork any 20-year-old if you gave him a shovel. He hired me after I left my factory job, and I was just thankful for the paycheck. The work wasn't glamorous, lots of hauling wood, digging holes, fixing fence lines for farms, but it kept me busy, and it kept the lights on in the trailer I was renting just outside town. Now that fall, the local cemetery board had called Donnie asking if he could come fix the old wooden fence that bordered the cemetery. The place was way out on a back road surrounded by woods and cornfields. The fence had been there for decades, maybe since the 50s, and it was falling apart in sections. Donnie told me we'd go out there one Thursday evening to start repairs, since the weekend was already booked solid with farm jobs. He figured we could get most of the posts reset before dark. I remember that Thursday clear as day because I almost bailed on him. My old Ford Ranger had broken down that morning. The alternator went out while I was on my way to pick up some groceries. I had to call my cousin Danny to tow it back to my place. He gave me hell the whole time, saying that truck belonged in a junkyard 10 years ago. Anyway, I had to borrow my mom's Chevy Malibu to get to work that evening, and she wasn't happy about it. She still had one of those old hanging air fresheners dangling from the mirror, the kind shaped like a tree, except this one had long since stopped smelling like anything. I still remember it swinging back and forth the whole drive out there. We got to the cemetery around 5:30. The place was small, maybe 50 or 60 graves at most, with old tombstones leaning in different directions. Some of them were so weathered you couldn't even read the names anymore. There were oak and pine trees lining the back edge, leading into a thick patch of woods. That was the part that always gave me an uneasy feeling, even before anything happened. The woods looked dark, even in daylight, like the trees swallowed up the sun. Donnie and I unloaded the tools, post-hole diggers, hammers, a few planks of wood. He told me to start pulling out the old rotted posts while he measured the new sections. We'd done this kind of work 100 times before, so we didn't really talk much. Just the sound of shovels hitting dirt, boards being yanked up, and Donnie's occasional cussing when he hit a root. It was like half an hour in when I first noticed something. I was crouched near the tree line, pulling out a post, and I saw something black move between the trees. I thought it was just a dog, maybe a stray. It looked low to the ground, quick, but the way it moved didn't sit right with me. Almost like it wasn't running on 4 legs, more like it slithered. I stood up and squinted, but when I looked again, there was nothing. Just trees swaying in the breeze. I shook it off, figured maybe I was seeing shadows. I didn't say anything to Donnie because he was the type to laugh and call you a city boy for being spooked by the woods. About an hour later, the sky was starting to turn orange and purple. We were trying to get one last section of fence straightened before it got too dark. I was bent over, hammering a nail into one of the new posts, and I felt something. Clear as day, it was like a hand pressed firmly against the middle of my back. Not a light brush, not like my shirt got caught on something, an actual push. I jerked around, half expecting Donnie to be standing there messing with me. But no one was there. Donnie was 30 feet away, bent over his tape measure, muttering to himself. My heart started racing. I stood there for a minute, hammer still in my hand, trying to make sense of it. I finally asked Donnie if he had just come up behind me. He looked confused, shook his head, and said, "Boy, I ain't got time to play games. Quit dragging your feet." I didn't push the subject, but my nerves were on edge after that. Every sound in the woods seemed louder, the crickets, the crows, even the wind. I kept glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. It felt like we were being watched. By the time we packed up, it was nearly dark. Donnie told me to start loading the tools into the back of his old Dodge Ram while he went to check something near the far side of the fence. The cemetery had that kind of quiet that only happens in the country. No cars, no voices, just the sound of leaves rustling and the occasional dog barking way off in the distance. I was tossing the last tool into the truck bed, and I glanced back toward the gravestones. That's when I saw her. I thought it was just a woman sitting on one of the graves. She was wearing what looked like a long dress, dark in color, and her posture was stiff, like she was waiting for something. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was off. Her face was shadowed, but I could make out what looked like a beard growing along her chin and jawline. A full beard. It didn't make sense. Her build, her posture, everything else looked feminine, but that face, she was staring straight at me, locked eyes with me, like she had been waiting for me to notice her. My chest tightened, and before I even realized it, I screamed. Not a yell to get Donnie's attention, but a full-blown scream that ripped out of me without thinking. Donnie came running back, asking what the hell was going on. When he saw my face, pale as a sheet, he looked over toward the graves. His expression changed quick. He didn't scream, but I could tell he saw her too. His eyes went wide, and he muttered, "Load it up! Let's go, now!" We scrambled to throw the rest of the tools in the truck bed. Neither of us dared look back again. Donnie jumped into the driver's seat, and I barely had the door shut before he slammed it into reverse and peeled out of the gravel lot, spitting dust behind us. I asked him what he saw. He shook his head, lit a cigarette with shaky hands, and said, "Don't ask, just don't." To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. The way she sat there, the way she stared, it was like she wasn't fully human, like something was wrong in a way my brain couldn't process.